maybe, just maybe, this is the year that the Cowboys don't screw everything up. Welcome in, everybody, to the Cowboys Deep Dive, a series where we break down all 32 teams leading up in my power rankings to my number one ranked team. And we're in the home stretch here as the Cowboys rank all the way up there as my number 6 team this year, a team that always has expectations, the Dallas Cowboys. But this year, maybe even a little bit more than normal. So today we're going to dive deep into this team, all of the aspects of the squad, and answer if those expectations are realistic. Can they go on a deep playoff run in a weaker NFC? Because if they don't, I think many will view this as a disappointing season for the Cowboys. But before we do dive in, if you could please take just a second to hit that like button down below. A ton goes into this series. It's really important to me that these videos do well, and by you hitting that like button, it really does help. It tells YouTube that you enjoy the content and to push it out to other NFL fans just like you. I really appreciate it. Also consider subscribing if you enjoy. You're not going to want to miss the rest of these deep dives and the start of my regular season NFL content. I do want to say one other note before we do get started. The show must go on here. I have to keep churning out these videos, and we are approaching cut day. So there will be players in this video that I discuss that don't ultimately make the team. I'm going to do my best to focus on who I think makes the 53, but apologies in advance if we end up talking about a guy, how he could impact the team, and he ends up playing for the Ravens or something. It is what it is. Ultimately, a roster bubble guy isn't going to change the rankings or anything like that. But I did want to put that out there in advance. But let's go ahead and get started. As always, taking a look at this team's offseason, we're going to go position by position and answer if they got better, worse, or stayed neutral at that position. And that's going to start with the coaching staff, where I believe this is a clear downgrade. They kind of botched this thing with offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. They scapegoated him completely, just as pretty much every NFL team and especially NFL fans do. They, after a disappointing season, look straight at the offensive coordinator and say, "Ha, your fault, you suck, you're fired." I don't know why it is that way, but that if one thing has been made clear to me throughout the history of doing this channel, the offensive coordinator is like always the first guy to get blamed. And I think that's a mistake here for the Cowboys. I think the Chargers are lucky to have him. And I think with Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer taking over as the offensive coaching staff there, it's going to leave some questions as far as if they can be as good as they were last year from a play calling perspective. And I know some Cowboys fans are going to come in here and say, good riddance, he's gone. The play calling was so bad last year. No, the hell it wasn't. It was really well run last year, and they're going to leave a lot of question marks with the new guys, well, the existing guys filling in for Kellen Moore, really. But as far as the roster is concerned, at quarterback, gonna stay neutral there, though they did just bring in Trey Lance. That'll be an interesting conversation when we get into the roster and the quarterback breakdown there. But at running back, I'm going to leave this as neutral. On paper, it looks like a downgrade, saying goodbye to Ezekiel Elliott. But realistically, Zeke was, if anything, a detractor from this team, taking carries away from the much better Tony Pollard. And then they're going to bring in Ronald Jones, who is suspended for the first 2 weeks of the season, as well as 6th-round running back Deuce Vaughn. Just going to leave this as neutral and potentially could be even better with Tony Pollard getting more carries. But then at tight end, this one's pretty clearly downgraded. They say goodbye to Dalton Schultz. They have replacement plans in place with Jake Ferguson, and they spend that 6th-round pick on Luke Schoonmaker. But Schultz was established, and for now, that's going to be a downgrade until those other guys can prove out to be the player that Schultz is. At wide receiver, though, very clear upgraded. They really only made a couple big moves this offseason, and going to get Brandon Cooks was one of them, but it didn't cost them much. A late-round pick to bring in a true number 2 explosive talent like him. Really think this is the highlight of their offseason, at least offensively. And all they're going to lose there is Noah Brown, who did play 2/3 of their snaps last year, but I don't think they're going to miss him all that much. They also, by the way, spent a 7th-round pick on Jalen Brooks, one of those guys that we'll see if he even makes the team. Then on the offensive line, I do have this as slightly downgraded, though it's much more a depth concern, which is relevant with this team considering Tyron Smith's almost certain injury questions. But they say goodbye to their starting left guard from last year, Connor McGovern, as well as some tackle depth, I suppose, in Jason Peters. All they really did was spend a 5th-round pick on a developmental guy in Asim Richards and a backup in Chuma Edoga. So I do think, at least from a depth perspective, that is going to be slightly downgraded. As we'll see later, they plan on sliding Tyler Smith into left guard and hoping Tyron Smith can stay healthy at left tackle. Easier said than done, though. As far as the defense is concerned, obvious upgrades with the interior defensive line. That was the focus of their draft as they spend that 1st-round pick on Mazie Smith. All they're saying goodbye to there is Carlos Watkins. So very clear upgrade on the interior defensive line. The edge group, I'm going to leave that as neutral, though I did like the 4th-round pick of Viliami Fehoko. Don't know how much of Fehoko we see this year, and they didn't really lose anybody else there. So going to keep that as neutral. Then at linebacker, I do have this as slightly downgraded. They lose Anthony Barr, who played half their snaps last year. And then they were hoping DeMarvion Overshown, their 3rd-round pick out of Texas, was going to compete for a starting job there. And unfortunately, he's going to miss his rookie season due to injuries. So that is going to be slightly downgraded. But then at cornerback, again, clearly upgraded. They do say goodbye to Anthony Brown, who's started a lot of games for this team and been okay, but bringing in Stephon Gilmore was one of my favorite moves any team did this whole offseason. Still played at a number 1 corner level last year, and they didn't have to give really anything to bring him in here other than cap space. So definite upgrades there. They also spent a 6th-round pick on Eric Scott Jr. Then with the safety room, it's all the same guys, so that's going to stay neutral. And then with the kicker punter room, definitely some questions at kicker. Brett Maher leaves in free agency, and they are going with an unproven talent in Brandon Aubrey. So for now, that's definitely a downgrade on paper. But with those additions of Gilmore and Cooks, and then filling that huge need in Mazie Smith in the draft with that defensive tackle spot, and then really just retaining most of their talent, this was a really exciting offseason for the Cowboys. And, you know, those additions right there, really those 3 names, lead you to believe that this team can get over the hump, fill their weaknesses from last year, and make that push this year in a weaker NFC. But we'll take a deeper look at this roster and why I feel that way in just a minute. But first, I want to look more at this coaching staff and how they stack up against the rest of the league, as well as what this team's going to look like schematically on both sides of the ball. And, you know, Mike McCarthy at the top as the head coach. And I'll just be honest, I am a Mike McCarthy skeptic, to the point that I actually rank him as the 26th head coach in the NFL. And this is going to be a super telling year for Mike McCarthy, taking over the offense, really, with Kellen Moore leaving. He's going to be working with Brian Schottenheimer, but for the first time since he got to Dallas, he'll be calling the plays. This will be Mike McCarthy's offense, not Kellen Moore's offense. And if he can't do a great job here, and if, again, this team can't win multiple playoff games, and Dak has a big year, and this offense that has no excuses can't be humming this year, I would almost guarantee that the fingers are pointed at Mike McCarthy, and from Jerry Jones, they move on from Mike McCarthy. I do think this is somewhat of a hot seat, even though the Cowboys have had success in recent years, especially after they scapegoated Kellen Moore. And I don't think, at least this year, Dak Prescott will be the scapegoat. Now, if there is a compliment of Mike McCarthy, it is that he has coached a lot of winning football teams, and I do think he understands how to run a building from a CEO sense, how to set a practice schedule, how to structure a coaching staff in a way that the message is consistent and concise, and I think he does a pretty good job with that. So they do rank in tier 3 for team culture. That ranks anywhere from 15th to 21st there. So I can't be overly critical of McCarthy from that point of view as a head coach, but I do, you know, unless you're going to be an elite culture guy, a guy like a Harbaugh, I want you to at least prove that you're a great offensive or defensive mind, and I just don't feel that way about Mike McCarthy. I think you look at the way things flamed out in Green Bay, and the way that he's kind of had to hand the keys to Kellen Moore here, I don't feel like he can modernize this offense and dial up a scheme that's going to be conducive to success in the modern NFL. You know, really have to go back to those last years in Green Bay where his offense became predictable, stagnant. You didn't see the changes in the scheme from year to year that you like to see from an offensive guru. Sure, you go back to, the early to late 2000s, 2007 to 2011, his West Coast offense took over the league. A lot of 11 personnel, bubble screens. Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers, they were the first duo to really run true RPOs at the NFL level at an efficient rate. With those bubble screens and stuff, like that was innovative at the time, but they haven't added a whole lot since. You're going to see a lot of slant flats, I would assume. That's a Mike McCarthy staple. A lot of bubble screens, a lot of inside zone out of shotgun, and a pretty uninspiring run game, in my opinion. So maybe he proves me wrong there, but as of now, I have the Cowboys ranked in the bottom tier for run game coaching and in tier 4 for pass game coaching, which ranks from 30th to 21st. I am a Mike McCarthy skeptic, and if this team's season doesn't go according to plan, I think there's a pretty good chance that I myself am pointing the fingers at Mike McCarthy. As far as Brian Schottenheimer is concerned, it's really just yet another kind of red flag for me with Mike McCarthy. Instead of bringing in, say, Dave Canales or Thomas Brown or Joe Brady. I don't know. I'm spitballing here, but young ascending offensive minds with new, fresh ideas. No, he hires Brian Schottenheimer, who's about as throwback, pro style, old school as it gets, stemming from obviously his dad, Marty. But, Brian Schottenheimer hasn't been able to keep a job for 12 years. I think he himself has been fairly criticized as an offensive mind. So I'm not particularly optimistic about that too. So we'll just have to wait and see how this goes. I think a lot of Cowboys fans do share that sentiment. But as far as the defensive coaching is concerned, it couldn't be much more of the opposite. I mean, Dan Quinn is the best coach on this staff, and I think everybody knows that. He's done such a brilliant job with this Cowboys defense. It's been cool to see his career come full circle too, because he was a total superstar back in the Seattle cover 3 days. After Gus Bradley left in 2012, Dan Quinn took over and continued the success of that Seattle 3 defense. But then he had his stay as the head coach in Atlanta, and they had their fun. They had, that deep playoff run. They went to the Super Bowl with Kyle Shanahan, didn't seal the deal. But Dan Quinn kind of had a learning moment in that stint, if you will, as the head coach. And I think he learned a lot about himself from a leadership perspective. A lot of people are able to have tremendous gains from their failures. But as a defensive mind, he really evolved too, because he learned the hard way in Atlanta that the league was catching up with the cover 3, Seattle 3 defense. And really by the time he got to Dallas, he was able to take a slight step back and say, how am I going to modernize this defense in a way that's successful in this era? And he totally reshaped the Seattle 3 defense, and it's still here in Dallas a very single high heavy structure. It's a lot of cover 3 still, and cover 1 is really highly used here in Dallas as much as anybody. But it is that heavy use of man coverage and more blitzing and stunts up front that has made Dallas such an intimidating front to face. And it's really to the point that I think the Dallas Cowboys are one of the best coached defenses in the NFL. I have them ranked in tier 1 for defensive coaching, and I think Dan Quinn has shown that as long as he's able to just be the defensive coordinator and focus on that side of the ball and be the defensive head coach, if you will, he's incredible at that. He's got a great resume, coached under Jim Mora, Nick Saban, Eric Mangini, Pete Carroll, Gus Bradley. And the resume is there in terms of the results. The last 2 years for the Dallas Cowboys, back-to-back years, the Cowboys have ranked second in defensive DVOA. So they're in very good hands on the defensive side of the ball with Dan Quinn, and it almost feels like he's content here. I don't know if they would promote him to head coach if and when they fired Mike McCarthy. if he would take a head coaching job elsewhere, or if he's just happy doing what he's doing now. But love me some Dan Quinn, and he's at least going to help out the overall coaching here that I think does have some skepticism about it. But before we get into the roster breakdown here, I got to tell you guys about the sponsor for today's video, Underdog Fantasy. The season is just around the corner, which means their pick'em contests are about to hit full force with the NFL regular season starting. I'm sure you guys have seen the screenshots of people sharing their underdog slips where you string together anywhere from 2 to 5 players where you're selecting player stats, anything from fantasy points, passing yards, rushing touchdowns, you name it. You pick higher or lower based on the numbers that Underdog sets, and you can win up to 20 times your money if you go 5 for 5 there. It's not just big payouts, though. This is the best way to increase your interest in any given, crappy Thursday night football game, or you want the full Sunday football slate. You can get that too. I'll be playing Underdog every single day that there is football going on this season. I can guarantee you that. So you guys are going to love Underdog. And right now, if you sign up at Underdog using promo code TFG, not only will you support my channel and this series, but they will match up to $100 on that first deposit. That is easily a full season's worth of extra pick'em lineups there. So that is promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy, and good luck. Let's get back into it. And now it's time to dive into this roster where we're going to rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And that means it's time to talk about Dak Prescott here. And, I really am exhausted at this point of going down this hill and this narrative of Dak Prescott is overrated. Like, do my opinions on Dak Prescott line up with where a lot of the media members talk about how good of a quarterback he is, and certainly how Cowboys fans talk about him? No. Like, a lot of people would put him in that second tier with guys like, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, those types of guys. I'm not there. I think he's much closer to a guy like Kirk Cousins than he is to those types of quarterbacks. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I feel that way later, but I really don't want to have this totally negative overtone with Dak Prescott. I think he's a really good quarterback. I think he's very clearly at the top of that sort of tier 3 of quarterback, if you will. And in a league where we don't know what we're getting from Kyler this year, Matthew Stafford's injury prone, who knows what the hell Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson are these days, that's enough for me to rank Dak Prescott as the 9th quarterback at this point in time. And I definitely think with the right team around him, Dak Prescott can win a Super Bowl. He's really good at reading defenses. He has one of the better pre-snap processors in the NFL. He's accurate. He's got a good enough arm. He can extend plays when he decides to. He's tough. He's got excellent leadership. There's a lot to like there in Dak, right? But there's definitely some fair criticisms of Dak Prescott. And the number one thing I've always said about Dak, not just last year, but throughout his career, is I can't stand his overall pocket presence. A lot of people call it factor. I call it pocket presence. What it really is that natural poise in the pocket to know when and how to use his feet to extend plays. And what's really frustrating about Dak Prescott is that you can put together a highlight reel of 10 to 20 times in a season when Dak shows brilliant pocket presence on a given play where he senses pressure and gets out of the pocket and makes a great throw on the move or scrambles for a first down. But it is the consistency in which he does that as you watch him throughout a game, throughout a season, it's just so frustrating. And it's like, Dak, move, use your feet. You have this great athleticism. There's pressure. Get out of the pocket. Or sometimes he'll bail from clean pockets and run too early. There's just no way to nail down his poise from the pocket. And I think it really hurts his week-to-week consistency. It hurts his ability to elevate a team because that pocket presence really ties into the structure of the offense and how much can you add on top of it, right? He's really good when that first read or his second read is there, when the pass protection's good. He's really good at picking defenses apart. But when it's not there, that's when you really just don't always know what you're going to get from Dak Prescott. And that to me is what keeps him out of that next tier of quarterbacks. And what really, when you get to the playoffs, you don't have a ton of confidence that when you get into like the fourth quarter and defenses are at their best, and they take away what you want to do well, he doesn't inspire a ton of confidence that he will beat you beyond the structure of the offense. And that's exactly what we saw in the Niners game last year, where it was almost an extreme bad case scenario of what Dak can be on a given week. He was completely flustered by that pass rush. There was no poise in the pocket at all. He was taking checkdowns too early. He was bailing from clean pockets. He was not running when the pass protection was good and his receivers were bottled up. It was a complete unmitigated disaster in that game, and definitely left a sour note on the season, which was frustrating because the week before that against Tampa, he was pretty damn good at those things. But this is who Dak has been throughout his career. Like, anybody that's been around the channel knows this has been a criticism of mine for Dak for years and years, and it just hasn't changed, and I don't think ever will. Now, some people will say, like, oh, his decision-making and the interceptions, like, became a huge issue for Dak last year. And, you know, I'm not quite as worried about that. He's always been such a good decision-maker. And, you know, maybe he is losing his confidence and starting to make more bad, stupid decisions. You know, I'm not quite ready to jump on this idea that Dak can't read defenses, because I still view him as one of the 5 to 10 best processing and decision-making quarterbacks in the league. I'm just not really worried about that side of his game yet, though there were some ugly moments last year for sure. But I definitely see him as, let's just throw the term out there, that systems quarterback. Not that he needs to play in a certain system or anything like that, but I really do think he's going to be dependent on these playmakers being great, on the offensive line being great, on the defense putting them in a position where he doesn't have to press and, you know, put up 30 points every week. That's the formula for winning a Super Bowl with Dak Prescott, to have a good quarterback there and make it so that he can't make or break the team's season, unlike last year where he broke the team's season with a putrid finale against the Niners. But that takes me to the fascinating conversation of this team acquiring Trey Lance from the Niners. And I can't really explain what happened in San Francisco. Maybe he just sucks. Maybe he slept with Kyle Shanahan's mom. I don't know. Clearly they didn't like him because he was never even really in the conversation to start over Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold, especially as the preseason kind of went on. And there's very clear red flags with how he's progressed and if he's any good. He's one of the more unique quarterback prospects that's ever been drafted because of the circumstances that stemmed from the COVID season and his career itself, where he wasn't a highly recruited guy. He went to North Dakota State and they started him as a freshman where he threw 28 touchdowns and no picks in a super easy offense to run because North Dakota State kicks everybody's ass. But the sample size for what he's been as a quarterback is just so small. And it still is, year 3 into his NFL career. But for a 4th-round pick for the Cowboys to go and get him, it's very much to me just like a why the hell not addition. He's only 23 years old, and he just turned 23. He'll be 23 for the course of the season. Teams are allowed to keep a 3rd quarterback really for no cost of the roster at this point due to the new rule, and they can just get an extended look at him. He's got incredible physical tools. That's why he went with the 3rd overall pick. Better physical tools than Dak Prescott has. Now, do I view this as they're trying to replace Dak Prescott right away? No, not at all. I think they see a ton of value in this. If nothing else, he could turn into a relatively cheap and good backup for a 4th-round pick over the next couple of years. But also, hey, maybe just a little bit of, we're going to, light a little bit of a fire under Dak's ass. Not that he needs it, but why not? Competition breeds excellence, and why not do that? And if Trey really does figure things out, again, at 23 years old, he's still incredibly green, then hey, maybe after next season, they do start to think about, is this a succession plan to Dak, who maybe has peaked out in the way that guys like Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr have in their careers. So I love this move all around for the Cowboys. It's a complete and utter no-brainer. He could be horrible at football because of the rare circumstances that led to him getting drafted 3rd overall. But just maybe things work out here. So definitely going to be interesting. Cooper Rush is actually going to be the backup probably for the whole season. He's stepped in like 1 games, but he doesn't really make a lot of impressive throws or do a whole lot of impressive stuff. He's fine as a backup, average backup, if you will. But again, ultimately, I have the Cowboys ranked 9th at quarterback. I think that is their ceiling at quarterback, though, and I would be surprised if we finish the year and I'm saying Dak Prescott is the 9th best quarterback in the NFL. There's a lot of young quarterbacks ascending. There's a lot of those kind of veterans that have had weird 2022 seasons. So when we're ranking most of these guys at their floor, Dak's got a really nice floor as a quarterback, and certainly one that's, as I said, high enough in the right situation that this Cowboys team could win a Super Bowl. It's just probably not going to really be thanks to Dak Prescott in the way that the Chiefs are able to do it because of Mahomes, or something like that. But let's talk about the weaponry that he has to work with, and this is a big reason why they feel they have enough talent here to win a Super Bowl with Dak Prescott as their quarterback. You've got your number 1 in CeeDee Lamb, who's truly on the up and up. When they drafted him, it was like, we don't really need a wide receiver, but this guy is incredibly talented and should not be available with the 16th pick. And they really feel, rightfully so, that he can ascend to being that sort of, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams level tier 1 wide receiver as a true alpha game changer. And I think you could argue in the last couple months of the year last year, CeeDee Lamb very quickly started to show that he can be that guy. So all he really has to do is continue that and prove it out. And I think we will be discussing CeeDee Lamb as that, elite tier 1 type of wide receiver. He's actually an incredibly similar player when you think about it to Garrett Wilson, who we just talked about with the Jets, where he plays above his size. He's a more slender receiver, which allows him to get incredible quickness and run after catch shiftiness, but his ball skills are better than you would expect for a more slender player. He'll elevate for the ball. He's got remarkable body control. He's got big, strong hands. He catches everything seemingly. So there's really very little to say about CeeDee Lamb, and should be a remarkably productive, dominant season for CeeDee. And I think the arrow is only pointing up for him. But what's nice here is that defenses won't be able to completely focus on CeeDee like they were last year because they bring in Brandon Cooks. And man, is he the perfect fit here. I think Cooks has been one of the most underrated players in the NFL in his time in Houston because they've had such an anemic passing game there for the Texans. But even then, Brandon Cooks has put up really great film and still shown that he is that guy. And I was surprised that his trade capital was as low as it was. And while this team got kind of fleeced in the Amari Cooper trade last year, they make up for it a little bit here a year later getting Brandon Cooks. Not that Cooks is as good as Cooper, but value-wise, they get him for a 5th or a 6th round pick, which is just insane value to get a guy like this who is the perfect number 2 wide receiver. He's got excellent deep speed to take the top off the defense, force defenses to keep safeties deep and over the top, which will open things up over the middle for CeeDee Lamb. But he's also an excellent short to intermediate route runner. He's a better contested catch winner than you'd expect. He's got great hands, can line up in the slot, can line up outside. He's a dream complement and really is going to elevate this group of weapons in a way that they didn't have a guy like Cooks last year. And that's going to allow Michael Gallup to fill in a perfect role for him. And Gallup's interesting because he was really not his old self last year coming back from the injury. And if he can get back to his old self, I mean, man, they are in business. But even if he is what he is last year, or was last year, but this time around he's their 3rd wide receiver instead of their number 2, that's going to be just fine. But Gallup brings kind of that X wide receiver skill set. really good ball skills, size, body control, ability to handle contact through coverage. He's about a career 50% contested catch guy, and he's a guy that, Dak, as we mentioned earlier, doesn't love to use his feet all the time. He oftentimes prefers to just stand tall in the pocket in the face of pressure and give his receivers a chance on difficult third downs. And Michael Gallup's been the reason he's had a lot of success in those situations over his career, because he will, take a well-placed back shoulder or high-pointed ball in tight coverage and come down with it more than a lot of other receivers. So that skill set with the athleticism and separation ability of guys like CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks really do pair well with Dak, because Lamb and Cooks can be, the primary reads where, okay, they should be able to get open. They should be able to separate. We can trust them within the structure. But when things do break down, Dak does have a good chemistry with Michael Gallup to help them convert some of those third downs and compensate for some of Dak Prescott's biggest deficiencies at those times in games. Now, as far as the wide receiver depth goes, you've got Jalen Tolbert, who apparently has had a good camp, enough that he's kind of stealing some reps from Michael Gallup. Extremely similar skill set there in Jalen Tolbert coming out of school. Very similar size, not the most dominant separator or anything like that, but good ball skills. So as a young kind of backup / competitor to Michael Gallup, he fills in nicely to this depth chart. Likewise with Simi Fehoko, another big-bodied guy. I liked him coming out, but he hasn't really impressed or done a whole lot here. We'll see if he even makes the team here by the time this video is released. Kevontae Turpin, also a guy that has reportedly had a good camp. He's definitely going to make this team because of what he brings as a return man, but he makes sense as an understudy to Brandon Cooks, honestly, a smaller, speedier guy. So I do kind of like that understudy approach there. Not going to say he could become a starter or should become a starter or anything like that, but you never know. And then Jalen Cropper is another guy with cut days coming that I've got my eyes on. I actually had a 5th round grade on Cropper. He's a really good route runner, a productive player at Fresno State. I think he could be a quality backup for this team, if not year one at some point. If nothing else, he'll probably make the practice squad and someone to keep an eye on, maybe getting a call up if they have injuries. But they did spend a 7th round pick on Jalen Brooks. I didn't watch Jalen Brooks. Don't know if he's even going to make the team. Very well might be only 5 or 6 wide receivers that get kept here. Don't expect the rest of these guys to be there. As far as the tight end room is concerned, when this team drafted Luke Schoonmaker in the 2nd round, I was like, why? He's not even a better prospect than Jake Ferguson was coming out of Wisconsin. Maybe one of my best draft takes, at least deep dive draft takes from that draft, was that Jake Ferguson was Dalton Schultz, and he goes to the Cowboys. When he played last year, he looked exactly like Dalton Schultz, minus some of the good run blocking that he still has to work on. And I was just like, that was such a seamless transition. Why spend a 2nd round pick on Luke Schoonmaker, who I felt was more of a late 3rd, early 4th round talent? Was not huge on that draft pick. And here we are come start of the season, and it doesn't sound like it's much of a competition. This is Jake Ferguson's tight end room, and maybe I'm confirming my priors here, but I think the arrow is pointing up on Jake Ferguson, and by season's end, he can be Dalton Schultz. Maybe not quite as a run blocker at this point in his career, but, Wisconsin guy, it's not for a lack of willingness, just needs to continue getting stronger in the weight room. But when you talk about his ability to show some wiggle on stick routes, sure-handed guy in the short game, and then that same exact trait where he has a really rare sense of which angles defenders are taking to come downfield and tackle him, and he's got a really shifty, evasive kind of upfield spin move after the catch on those quarterback-facing stick routes. And Dalton Schultz did the same thing. That's why I really had that pro comp for him. So I think him and Dak are going to develop a good chemistry. And I think, like fantasy football, Jake Ferguson is a really good, late round tight end flyer to have. I think he's going to be a part of this offense, knowing that Dak likes to target those guys. He is a lower depth of target type of quarterback. So big fan of Ferguson. That's not to say Schoonmaker doesn't have talent. He has really good athleticism, fluid hips, showed some signs in his route running, and was useful in the receiving game in the very few times that Michigan decided to use him. But he's going to turn 25 in September. There is that lack of production. He's behind the 8 ball, not going to beat out Jake Ferguson anytime soon. So, I liked his lead blocking when he comes in 2 tight end packages for like wide zone and stuff. But yeah, I think this is Jake Ferguson's room, and I think he's going to be a very good possession tight end in time. They've also got Peyton Hendershot, Sean McKeon, who played last year, were fine backup types. I expect that to be the room right there, those 4. And then with the running backs, Tony Pollard has been waiting to kind of break out in the receiving game. They've loved Zeke for his pass blocking. I think Pollard has grown in that department to the point where they can trust him, and he can really be a 3-down back here for the Cowboys if they want him to be that. He caught a lot of passes at Memphis. He's explosive. He runs routes. There's no reason he can't become one of the 5 to 7 best receiving backs in the NFL. I think he's already in that conversation. It's just, more production over time to make you feel safe about that. But, I think he's going to be a really dynamic option in a way that Zeke hasn't been in a lot of those third downs. So I love that. Also got to talk about Deuce Vaughn, who's, Darren Sproles-esque in terms of his overall instincts in the receiving game. Really like what he could bring to the table if they say, you know what, Tony, we want you to stay healthy for the run game. We love what Deuce does in the receiving game. And then Deuce Vaughn becomes kind of that, like Darren Sproles type of back where he's a featured third down option. I'm excited to see what he could be in his career. Obviously has those physical limitations. He's like 5'5", 180 pounds. There's not a lot of those guys sitting around in the NFL. In fact, there's none. So he's got to overcome this size outlier aspect of his game, but really talented, shifty back. The rest of those guys, you're not really expecting anything. Ronald Jones had the perfect opportunity to be a receiving back for Tom Brady and couldn't take advantage of that. If you can't make that work, I don't know what to tell you. I just don't think he gets it in the receiving game. I think that's a big reason he never really played for the Chiefs, too. So there is your group of weaponry. They rank 7th in the NFL, obviously, in this league, loaded with good weaponry groups. That is a massive compliment for this Cowboys team. But let's circle back to these running backs a little bit more, how they rank in the run game. And I have them ranked 13th at running back, which is pretty high praise for Tony Pollard. And it's going to be really fun to see him get this opportunity as the feature back. He's got a ton of speed, solid enough size that once he hits full speed, he runs through a ton of arm tackles. He's got springy athleticism with a good jump cut to change lanes and make guys miss in space. There's really no reason he can't be a top 10 running back in the NFL. He does have a little bit of that lack of like true power that guys like, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, what I think Saquon can have, and Bijan Robinson, to be like a top 5 back in the NFL, but you could very easily have a top 10 running back here. All it really needs is Tony Pollard to prove that out with this starting opportunity. Now, as far as the backups are concerned, there's some questions here. Ronald Jones had a weird year last year, signed with the Chiefs, was a pretty clear opportunity, right? Like a 7th round pick, and Isaiah Pacheco totally took that job. But for a running back position that's, you would think, like the easiest to play if you have crazy physical tools, Ronald Jones has been about as bad as you could possibly imagine his career would have been, because as a 2nd round pick coming out, he had crazy athleticism. It was like, how is this guy going to be a bad back in the NFL? And that kind of, I guess, turned out to be true. He's not really a bad back, but his vision is about as bad as it gets. He doesn't have good receiving chops at all. There's just something missing there in terms of his instincts for the position, and that's held him back. But still a guy that you put him in a straight line, a well-blocked run, and you tell him which gap to hit. As long as he remembers what gap to hit, you've got a good back there. But that's a pretty specific skill set there. And he's suspended for 2 games here. So, whatever on Ronald Jones, fine enough as a backup. But then beyond Ronald Jones, this is, really your guess is as good as mine as far as which of these guys end up making the 53-man roster. So, I don't want to spend too much time on Rico Dowdle or Malik Davis. One of these guys will probably make it. I don't think it is very consequential in terms of who does. Dowdle is a little more unproven, but more talented, whereas Malik Davis, maybe a little bit less talented, that actually played a little bit more last year, because Dowdle, I believe, got hurt in the preseason. And then Deuce Vaughn, I'm much more optimistic that he can translate to the receiving game with his size. The run game, I'm much more skeptical. I know he's had some highlight plays in the preseason. It's just preseason, especially in these practice drills where they can't hit, so it's just so hard to judge. But, if you could put Deuce Vaughn in Ronald Jones' body, you've got a fucking Hall of Fame running back, but you can't do that, right? So he's not particularly fast. He's shifty, and he's obviously not big or powerful. He went down on first contact a ton at Kansas State. He's just, when you've got 240-pound linebackers hitting him at full speed, he's gonna go ragdoll. So he does a good job with his vision and ability to stay low, that he can have some really good runs and he can get lost and sneak into the second level. But I just don't know how sustainable he's going to be as an actual runner of the football over time. He's not like MJD where he's really short, but he's 200 plus pounds and is a freight train in his lower half. That's not Deuce Vaughn. So I think he makes the team for his receiving chops, but not much expectations for him as a runner. So ultimately, this is really about Tony Pollard, but I think his hype and expectations are totally justified. Again, I've got the Cowboys ranked 13th in the league at running back heading into the year. They do get a decent-sized boost as well from how they use Dak Prescott in the run game. Once or twice a game or so, they'll sprinkle in a read option or, QB draw, QB power even. He's got the size and speed to be a design runner. They don't want to do it a ton, but just to keep defenses honest, to create some numbers problems, he'll be an asset to this run game. He ranks tied for 11th in the NFL in terms of how much of a boost the Cowboys get from their quarterback. Now, if anything happened to Dak and they do decide to go to Trey Lance, that would be fascinating. That would be a potentially, top 8-ish or so multiplier from the QB, but we're not expecting that. And Cooper Rush is definitely not giving you anything there. He's not much of an athlete. But let's talk about who's blocking for all these guys. This offensive line, and the starting five is really good. In fact, they rank as a top 5 offensive line for me. But it is tough because their depth is not very good, as we'll see, and their depth matters more than most because Tyron Smith is one of the most, if not the most, injury-prone players in the National Football League at this point in time, and expecting him to make it through a season is like fantasy land to assume that. So it is tough, but right now, this group looks poised for really good things. They've got them ranked 5th in run blocking, where they're especially dominant, but 12th in pass blocking, where, again, there might be some more questions there. But from left to right, you got Tyron Smith, who, even when he's playing, isn't the world-beating all-pro tackle that he was in his prime. I do think all these injuries have led to a little bit of a lack of range in his kick slide, range in his ability to pull, and have those insane move blocks where at a point in time, it was like him and Trent Williams were like the 2 top tackles in the game. Trent has continued his athleticism. Tyron, not so much. He's been trending down and getting hurt. But I've always felt like him with that go-go gadget arm sleeve thing that he wears. He's so robotical in his technique in a good way. And he still has certainly good athleticism in the run game to get off the ball and good play strength. So he's a stud when he plays. But again, how many games do you get from him? And then at left guard, it's Tyler Smith, who's been really impressive since he came into the league. I was skeptical about this draft pick because his technique was really questionable at Tulsa, but it was fair to say, he was an incredible athlete for the position, and he obviously isn't getting the best offensive line coaching at Tulsa. So if they really liked, the interviews with him and they felt like he was going to respond to coaching well, they obviously did, and they gamble on him, and his technique grew tremendously over just one offseason of NFL coaching, to the point that he was playing some guard, some tackle, was really good at both, was not a flawless pass protector, but was a lot better than I thought he would be. They cleaned up some of his footwork stuff that was really a mess in his college tape. And the run blocking was as good as you would have imagined it would be. I mean, he is ruthless in the run game. He's incredibly athletic. He's got really good play strength. He really has the potential to be just straight up one of the best run blocking offensive linemen in the NFL. There was flashes of him maybe being that at times last year. Some Trent Williams-esque highlights, I will just say. And then with the improvements we saw in his pass protection, the arrow certainly is pointing up there. So they're going to have him at guard for now, and I actually agree with that kind of being their best starting five as long as Tyron Smith is hurt. But you can imagine as soon as something happens to Tyron Smith, it's going to be Tyler Smith back out there at tackle. So it definitely improves the floor that you would think is pretty bad with Tyron Smith getting hurt, if that makes sense. But that does open up questions in terms of who's stepping in at guard. We'll talk about who that could be momentarily, and maybe by the time this video drops, they'll have picked someone up off of someone else's team who gets caught or something. But they definitely are very optimistic of how their first-round pick from last year is projecting for the future of this offensive line. And then you go to center, Tyler Biadasz, heading into a contract season, totally adequate starting center. He's got the right mentality and technique. It's just his lack of physical tools does betray him at times. He's just not overly consistent for that reason, but a solid player that they're not too worried about. Then you've got the all-pro right guard, Zach Martin. They work things out on the contract as they should have. It's tough to kind of even analyze these all-pro level linemen, because what do you really want me to say? Like, he's a great athlete. He's got amazing technique. He's done it for years. He's Zach Martin. They got him back. Awesome. Elevates this offensive line. Yada, yada. He's fantastic. Then you have Terrence Steele at right tackle. He's heading into a contract year as well. Undrafted guy who has really carved out a nice career for himself here. He's a bit of a bipolar offensive lineman, if you will, though, where he's really good in the run game, and then the pass protection leaves a little bit to be desired. You know, his splits there are a pretty big reason why they're 12th in pass blocking, but then 5th in run blocking. I mean, he is a coke machine on the move when he's a run blocker, and he's got that dickhead mentality. He plays with a chip on his shoulder, plays for that contract, being an undrafted guy. Good enough athleticism to be a good run blocker as well. But in pass protection, he does have slower feet, and his hands aren't always used correctly. So he's going to have some losses in pass pro, for sure. And I think that's kind of why they're a little bit hesitant to give him a massive payday at this point in time, because they don't know if they can do better in terms of protecting Dak Prescott and giving him time to throw. But he's not a dumpster fire as a pass protector either. He's an adequate starter in that department. So there's your starting five. But the second you have to go into your depth, it does make me worried. Especially you really look at that left guard spot, because you anticipated Tyron Smith injury and Smith stepping out to left tackle, and their guard depth is a joke, man. You've got Josh Ball, who's a 6'8" developmental offensive lineman, who's a nasty run blocker with great athleticism, but not someone I'd trust to be anything more than a turnstile in pass protection. Asim Richards, who I liked as a 5th-round pick, undersized, athletic tackle prospect. They've got him listed as a guard. Maybe he surprises, but his technique was really rough. They're maybe hoping for a Tyler Smith-esque growth in his technique at the next level with NFL coaching, but you can't count on that. Matt Farniok is the one that's played out of this group, but he's played horribly. Beyond that, you're not even assured the rest of those guys make the team. I would be interested in Alec Lindstrom if he did. The brother of Chris Lindstrom, I thought was a good wide zone blocking center at Boston College, but that's not really the offense this team wants to run. They're more of a head-up blocking scheme. So I think that was a poor choice by his agent to send him to Dallas. But then you look at the tackle depth, and maybe Chuma Edoga could play some guard. I can't recall if he has or not. I know he's not like oversized or anything, so maybe that's your best option. He was a 3rd-round pick by the Jets. He's been slowly developing in the NFL. He's the best depth that they have. Then you got Matt Waletsko, who's definitely looks like a tackle. I'd be surprised if he could play guard. Another developmental type, along with Alex Taylor, who's another developmental type. Like, they have some freaky athletes with upside, and maybe someday Waletsko, Taylor, Josh Ball, Asim Richards, maybe some of these guys hit. But to count on that in what you're hoping to be a championship season, when you have a tackle who is almost guaranteed to get hurt, it's very risky. So this would be a great, like, Dalton Reisner spot, or if somebody gets cut, or like, is Roger Saffold sitting around as guard depth? I don't know. Something like that would make me feel a lot better about the floor of this offensive line. But if these guys magically stay healthy, it's going to be one of the best offensive lines in the entire league. It is slightly worth noting that they have one of the worst groups of skill blocking, run blocking skill players. Both their tight ends leave a little bit to be desired in that department. The wide receivers aren't notably good at it. It's more a case of those guys don't elevate the run game as opposed to it actively hurting them, but it is worth noting. But that wraps up the offense as a whole. It's a really balanced offense. They rank 10th in passing game, 9th in run game, which does spit out the 13th overall offense because they're, I guess, non-elite in both departments, but this could easily be a top 10 offense in the NFL. I think their floor is really, really good. I would just love to see them add one more interior offensive line piece to give them a little bit of insurance there. But for the most part, I fully expect this offense to be cooking. And if it's not, the one thing that kind of drags them down here is that coaching. And we already talked about how, McCarthy could be on the hot seat if things don't go according to plan here. But let's talk about Dan Quinn's defense, which is a thrilling conversation. This is a super dynamic group that, as I said earlier, they've been a top 2 defense in the NFL the last 2 years and are looking to repeat those numbers. So let's start with the pass rush, where I've got this as the 3rd best pass rush in the NFL. D-line overall is going to rank 5th, where they're 19th in D-line run defense, better than they've been in the past, but still a partial question mark. But obviously this is a special group, particularly in the pass rush department. And that just starts with Micah Parsons. He's in that conversation. To me, the big 3 in terms of pass rushers with Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, and Myles Garrett. Pick your poison in terms of who is the best pass rusher in the NFL. Micah is probably the more unique of the 3, where he's still kind of learning the position. You look at Garrett and Bosa, and it's like, yeah, they've probably kind of maxed out in terms of their technique and game planning for opposing tackles and what kind of moves they want to go to. Whereas this year is actually the first year where Micah Parsons is just listed as and fully focusing on just being an edge. Granted, last offseason that was mostly the plan, but they still had games where they just used him as a linebacker. Like that Packers game, it was just stupid. Like, why would you take the reason your defense is great and just delete it by putting him at a meaningless position at linebacker? Like, it's very clear this dude is an edge rusher, and he is, when he's rushing the passer, a game-wrecking, dare I say, Lawrence Taylor clone at the position. I mean, seriously, his talent is freaking believable. The way he bursts off the edge with his bend and just easy, raw power, his ability to control tackles, work his way to the quarterback with ease. And again, that's with average technique. Like, I'm not, like, he's clearly worked at his technique. He knows what he's doing, but there's still so much room for him to grow in terms of mixing in different pass rush packages. And the thought of him continuing to get better there, where there's no reason to believe he won't, is really terrifying. And inversely, his experience as a linebacker has helped him understand run fits and how to stack and shed and defend the run, where granted, he's not as elite at that as he is as a pass rusher, but he's still damn good in that department, and he splashes into the backfield a ton. So it feels like it's almost inevitable for when he wins his first Defensive Player of the Year, and then the question becomes, how many will he get? He really is that type of a player and is the highlight of this entire team. But it does not stop with him with the pass rush. You still have the ideal number 2 complementary guy in DeMarcus Lawrence, who, yes, is getting up there in age, and yes, isn't the Defensive Player of the Year candidate that he was himself in his prime for a year or two, but he still has a lot of those traits. He's incredibly strong. He's a three-down defender where he can defend the run and rush the passer. What they'll also do is line him up on the inside a lot of times as like a 4-eye when they rush from a wide 9 formation up front. And his quickness, paired with what is still some pretty good old man strength, can really work some guards at times. So he's versatile, fully effective as a number 2 rusher. He's still one of the best number 2s in the NFL. And then they really have 3 more edge players that are a key part of this front, all in different ways. So Dorrance Armstrong has had a remarkable growth as a player from an undersized, designated pass rush specialist type of prospect out of Kansas. He has now turned into a really physical, strong, early down edge player. He allows them to rotate DeMarcus Lawrence so that he can stay fresh as a pass rusher and stay healthy at his age. He's just an effective all-around player. He still has good all-around traits to rush the passer. He's not a complete player in that department, but he's kind of the ideal number 3 guy where you can do a little bit of everything with him and use him to kind of make sure you can get the most out of guys like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, as Armstrong does a lot of the dirty work. And then you have Sam Williams, who's really intriguing here. Did just get in trouble with the law with some substance problems. This is a guy that had open and obvious character red flags coming out. And that's why I was a little bit surprised he went in the second round, but the talent was pretty undeniable. I mean, his athletic traits at his size are remarkable, and he really impressed in terms of displaying some of his pass rush moves in his rookie season. He played in one of those really frustrating roles in college where he played a lot of like 4-eye, similar to like what Will McDonald and a lot of these guys in this draft played. Colleges just don't do these guys a lot of favors for that. So it was just tough to know for Sam Williams, how many different pass rush moves do you have rushing from the outside? And he showed them off in his first year as a rookie. And he only got out there for 300 snaps, 191 pass rush snaps, but he ended up with 22 pressures, 4 sacks. And because this is a front in Dan Quinn where they love running stunts, I think they ran either the first or second most stunts in the NFL, where you're slanting D linemen, looping D linemen, trying to kind of confuse offensive lines and create free gaps for pass rushers to shoot through. Sam Williams has insane speed and bend to get into those openings, and that's really where you saw kind of the perfect meeting of the minds of player and scheme. So he's a really important player for them generating the rush that they do, and being able to use him in such a specific designated pass rush role sheltered a lot of his weaknesses in terms of not being the most complete player coming out of college. So he's got to stay out of trouble. He's got to keep developing. They don't necessarily need him, but they definitely want him. But if they don't see what they like from him, they do still have Dante Fowler, who's basically just an older version of Sam Williams. Another really special athlete, getting up there in age, though, a former first-round pick that's just never really reached his upside, but, you know, he's still been a capable starter because of his physical tools. He's effective in this scheme for the same reasons we mentioned in terms of the stunts and all that stuff. So for him to be your 5th edge player, you really like that. And then you also have Viliami Fehoko, a 4th-round pick, who I loved, man. And this is such an easy comp because he goes to the Cowboys, and Cowboys fans remember Tyrone Crawford, who was kind of a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none defensive lineman, where he can play a little bit inside, a little bit outside. You also have the kind of Michael Bennett influences from Dan Quinn, where he will use a bigger-bodied edge as a 5-tech on early downs, slide him inside on later downs. I don't know just how much he's going to play here in his rookie season. They already kind of have that guy in Chauncey Golston, who's more of an interior guy for them. But at some point, Viliami Fehoko is going to step up and be a useful player for them. He has really an instinctive ability as a defensive lineman. Some of the best hands and just overall instincts to navigate his way into the backfield that you'll see with quick feet at his size. So I was a fan of that pick. And then I know Isaiah Land has been getting some hype. We'll see if he makes the team, but his speed is insane. He's only like 225 pounds, but given how much they like to kind of get to different sub packages and blitz and loop and stunt, he could be a really unique weapon that I think Dan Quinn might have a plan for. So if he makes the team, don't be surprised if Isaiah Land plays 80 snaps and ends up with 4 or 5 sacks that were all schemed up for him. But I guess we'll see. Then you go inside, and it's a better group than they had last year, but definitely not the best interior run defense group. If there's a question about this defensive line, it's going to be that. But you got a couple starters that I really like. You got Osa Odigizua, who was definitely one of my favorite kind of my guys in that draft, and still a really underrated 3 technique in the league. He's a do-it-all player, a little bit better as a pass rusher than a run defender, but just kind of rare core strength for a guy who is considered undersized, plays at about 290 pounds, but that does give him the quickness to sidestep blockers in both phases as a rusher, as a run defender. His shorter frame allows him to get easy pad level where he can control his blocker. And, he's got a versatility of rush moves too. He can go to a bull rush, a swim move, a spin move. He's kind of got it all. He's still getting better. I'm a big fan of Osa, and I'm especially a big fan of Osa now that they have a real starting kind of big-bodied defensive tackle to complement his game. Was just such a big fan of the Mazi Smith, whichever one he goes by. Cowboys fans, you can let me know so I get it right. But I had been mocking Smith to the Cowboys in like all of my first round mocks for the second half of draft season, and was one of my better kind of mock draft calls. Was the Cowboys getting him as kind of the perfect spot. I even got to go on the That's Good Sports podcast with all those guys, and Scooter McGruger asked me, what's the draft pick that would set the Cowboys over the edge? And without hesitating, I said, Mazi Smith is like the perfect way to fill out this group, because they don't really have another guy like this in this front. A guy with the size that can two-gap and play the nose, and even when he's not shedding blocks and disrupting plays in the backfield, he's taking up 2 blockers and opening things up for everybody else. I really see a young DJ Reader in Smith's game. I think my pro comp was also Dalvin Tomlinson. And the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about Smith is that he, in terms of evaluating the one trait of like, can you shed blocks as a defensive tackle? He is one of the best block shedding defensive tackles I've ever watched, because he plays low to the earth. He has incredible, long, stout, strong arms where he can control one blocker and shed them and dispose of them at ease, paired with rare quick feet. I don't think he got to do his 3-cone, but he was going to test a rare 3-cone at his size if he was able to do it. But it shows on tape the quick feet to just shed blocks in one gap. And if he's not asked to double team, he's going to be a really good run defender right away. Now, if there is a question about him, it's the motor on a week-to-week basis. Can he consistently drop his dead leg and give what it takes to eat double teams? That's just something that others had seen in other games that I didn't watch about on him. In the games that I did watch, though, which were like, Ohio State and TCU and those championship games that really mattered, he was dominating as a anchoring nose tackle type. So I know it's in there. It's just a matter of getting that out in him, down in, down out. But I'd be pretty surprised if he doesn't upgrade the run defense on the interior at least a little bit this year. And then he's not useless as a pass rusher. He just, the one thing I had on his notes was how often Michigan asked him to play in what looked like a squatty potty stance, where he's back kind of squatting down on all fours. And you literally cannot rush the passer from that stance. You can't fire out of your stance. It's like a contain rush type of assignment. But when he was able to get into a 3-point stance, you saw some of those athletic traits come through. So there's upside for him to be a more useful pass rusher, similar to the way guys like, Dalvin Tomlinson or DJ Reader have become throughout their careers. So a big fan of this pick. I love how he fits in and can't wait to watch him. As far as the rest of the depth there on the interior, it's pretty lousy. I think the next leading snap getter will be Chauncey Golston, because they'll bring him in and take Mazzy out sometimes for those third down rush packages. Golston's kind of a tweener type. They like some of his skill sets for certain assignments, and he does a good enough job for what they ask him to do. You got some nose tackle types in Jonathan Hankins and Quinton Bohanna there. And then Neville Gallimore has been truly horrible. I don't know if he'll make the team if he's not developing there. He was an athletic pick that just needs to get better, I guess. But they're happy that, they don't have to play Neville Gallimore as much now that they have Smith. As far as Hankins is concerned, he's definitely not in his prime anymore. They were prepared probably to bring him back as their kind of rotational nose tackle in the role that Mazzy's going to fill in for. But now that he's a backup, that's pretty good depth in terms of just aging veteran space-eating nose tackles go, but not a whole lot of athleticism, virtually no pass rush ability there at all. But can rotate with Mazzy. That rounds out the defensive line. It's a split group. The run defense is a minor concern with the interior guys there. But like I said, I think it'll be a little bit better, less of a weakness. And then the pass rush should be great, if not even better than it was last year. But let's move on to the linebackers. This is probably the weakest room on the team. But it's not a huge weakness necessarily. It shows you how much talent this team really has across the board. But they're a little bummed, I think, that Overshown isn't going to get a chance to compete for snaps here. But I'm not necessarily worried about this group either. They actually rank 23rd overall at linebacker, 18th in coverage, and 22nd in run defense. Now, a big reason why the coverage is a little bit higher there is because of what Jaron Kearse does, where he played almost 400 snaps as a linebacker type of player last year, and I fully anticipate that they'll do that again. Kearse is 6'4", 215 pounds, and as that dime linebacker, he's really good covering tight ends and running backs out of the backfield. He's the best quote-unquote cover linebacker that they have, and he makes up for some of the deficiencies that these other two guys have or might have. But as far as the actual linebackers here, you got Leighton Vander Esch, who just might be the most average linebacker in the NFL at this point in time. He's got size, he's got a lot of experience, he's solid against the run, okay in coverage. At a point in time, he looked like he was going to be a top 10 kind of Pro Bowl caliber linebacker, but a slew of injuries, I think, have slowed his game down a little bit, physically speaking, but his mind is still pretty sharp. So I don't really have any concerns about Leighton Vander Esch. I'm not particularly excited about him. He's just still here and is solid. But you are going to open up some questions about that LB2 spot. Now, it does help that I was particularly high on Damone Clark coming out. In fact, I actually had a near identical grade on Damone Clark, who ended up going in the 5th round, as I did on Quay Walker, who went in the 1st round to the Packers. I think I had a 3rd to a 4th round grade on both these guys, but Clark got hurt before the draft, and that's why he fell, and it was presumed that he would not be available in his first season, and surprisingly, mid-season, he got out there, and he actually started pretty much the second half of the season for Dallas and was pretty good, especially as far as rookie linebackers are concerned. I really liked Clark's overall instincts at LSU. This is a guy that had transferred from one of the Dakota schools to LSU, started in that transfer season, and he was not a real 5th-round prospect. He was a day 2 type of pick that just we weren't sure how healthy he was going to be, and like I said, his first year was very promising. I think they have a real prospect here, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that he can be at least a good number 2 linebacker. There's a balanced player at LSU, a little bit better in coverage than in run defense, but a really consistent tackler, and the run defense can come along because he has all the size to do that. Just has to come out and prove that he can be a plus linebacker, but I think he showed at least last year that he's an adequate player and not someone you really have to worry about. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what his season looks like. You do hope he holds on to this job, though, because without Overshown here, it's pretty measly depth. You've got Jabril Cox, who a lot of people liked coming out of LSU. I'll just say I liked Damone Clark a hell of a lot better than Jabril Cox. Now, I think Cox has struggled with some injuries and obviously not listed as a starter here. So, as a backup, 4th round pick in 2021, kind of wait and see there, but wouldn't be expecting much. They also have a late round pick in Devin Harper, who didn't get to play in his rookie season. Not someone I watched when they had drafted him. So wait and see there. Malik Jefferson, journeyman special teamer, who probably doesn't even make the team. I don't know. Overshown getting hurt was definitely unfortunate, though I like Damone Clark as a 3-down linebacker a hell of a lot better than I do Overshown. I actually had a mid to late day 3 grade on Overshown. I had a lot of questions about him. I wasn't crazy about that draft pick, but they were excited about what his athleticism and his local ties were going to bring to the table here. But who knows? Maybe it can be a blessing in disguise where it opens up an opportunity for Damone Clark to play this year, and then next year Overshown can come back in and be a running mate to Damone Clark. We'll see how this all plays out. Ultimately, I'm not really all that worried about this group. It's hard for a linebacker room to make or break a team's season. Case in point, last year it was mostly Leighton Vander Esch and Damone Clark, and this was the number 2 defense in the NFL. So you have that again, and maybe even better with some year 2 growth from Clark getting full speed with the injury. Another year in the rear view mirror. But then you get to the secondary, and it's really good there too. Rounding out, as we've seen, just a really complete football team. They rank 7th for me in DB coverage. They're also a really physical group. They rank for me in tier 2 for DB run support, which is anywhere from 3rd to 10th in the NFL in terms of the help that they get from the secondary against the run. But you have a really stout, really cornerback quadruple set, however you want to say that, and an awesome cornerback duo at the top with Trayvon Diggs, Stephon Gilmore. In the slot, it's going to be a competition/rotation of Jordan Lewis and breakout rookie Deron Bland from last year. But with Gilmore and Diggs, this is such a dream combination for Dallas to bring in this year, because Stephon Gilmore still has it, and he's going to be their best coverage corner this year. And Cowboys fans might be averse to that right now because they love Trayvon Diggs and they love the interceptions. They love that he's Stephon's brother. Well, at least between Stephon Gilmore and Trayvon Diggs, you have a Stephon Diggs. But jokes aside, Gilmore is going to be their quote-unquote shutdown guy. He's the one with the consistent, sticky man-to-man coverage, the real technique, the lateral quickness that Diggs lacks a little bit of to hang on some of those sharper route cuts against great route runners. And while he's maybe not what he was in his prime, where he was the best corner in football, he showed with the Colts last year that he still has it. And I don't think that's going to just disappear this year. Excellent trade to go and get him. And his coverage is going to funnel more targets to Trayvon Diggs, which is a good thing. And last year, Diggs did take a step up in terms of his down-to-down coverage consistency. And I don't know if it was a conscious decision to be a little bit less risky and aggressive, or if it just was natural development or just a complete fluke, but he seemed to me to find a more healthy balance of that ultra-aggressive, almost always trying to bait the quarterback mentality to, like, you know what, let's be a little bit more sticky in coverage and not lead the league in yards allowed. And he did a really good job to not be burnt toast more often than not. Still some plays, though, where he's getting lost. He's, not quite as good as guys like Stephon Gilmore and some of those top corners in terms of route anticipation and sticking at a guy's hip pocket on the trail. But he's more than good enough in true coverage ability to be a number 2 corner. And then you stack on top of that his remarkable ball skills, where he's got undeniably at this point the best hands in the league. And I think with more targets getting funneled his way now with Gilmore on the other side, you could see him get back to being towards double digits in interceptions and back into the, all-pro conversation that he was in 2021 because of those interception numbers. Reminds me a lot of the success that like Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters have had for Baltimore in recent years, but maybe even a step up from that. So really nice cornerback duo, one of the 5 best in the NFL for sure. And then you're going to be pretty set in the slot. Neither Lewis or Bland are necessarily locked down, but both are really solid options. Bland, I guess, could potentially continue to get better. I had a bunch of interceptions last year, which, as we know, can be something that leads to flash in the pan seasons or signs of regression, so to speak. But it wasn't just the interceptions. Like, he had a lot of really good coverage reps, earned that playing time for good reason. He showed that he's at least a good option in the slot. But the fact that he didn't beat out Jordan Lewis, at least at this point in time, tells you kind of what they think about his coverage a little bit, because Lewis has always been kind of that career adequate starter at corner. But either way, you're kind of injury proof there. Lewis can step outside. Bland can step into the slot. Whatever you got to do there, you run 4 deep really nice. Then you got Eric Scott. They drafted in the 6th round. I really don't know too much about him. I know Cowboys fans point to that. I think he ran a bad 40 time, but there was a good excuse for why, and he's actually a lot faster than that. And he's been playing well in the preseason. I'm not familiar with his game. I'm very wait and see. You don't need anything from him, but excited to see what he's got. And then you got Kelvin Joseph, who was a 2nd-round pick with all the athletic tools in the world, but just kind of a knucklehead that can't figure things out. Very immature guy at this point in time. So that's the question mark there with him. But man, you'd love if he could take to some mentorship from a guy like Stephon Gilmore and get his career on the right track, because his combination of traits is really special and rare for the cornerback position. And then you got, CJ Goodwin will probably make it because of his special teams prowess. Nahshon Wright has played for them and been pretty bad. I was never a Nahshon Wright guy. We'll see if he makes the team. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up cutting him. But yeah, obviously it's a really good cornerback room. And then the safety room is really solid. Nothing I'm overly ecstatic about back there, but 3 really good players that they use all 3 of these guys in dime packages, and they all make sense within their role. So you got Malik Hooker, who spends most of his time as a free safety here. And, he was a highly touted 1st-round pick that looked like a, superstar for the Colts early in his career, had a random, rare, weird falling out. The Cowboys picked him up, and last year he started to look a lot more like that guy. He's got a good balance on the back end. He's got good size, really good tackling consistency coming downfield. He's maybe not elite back there in terms of playmaking ability, but it still almost feels like he's due for a season with like 5 or 6 picks and like a Pro Bowl caliber year. They give him a contract extension. I don't really know why the league doesn't view him so highly and all this stuff, but really good player on the back end nonetheless. Not worried about it, to say the least. Then you got Donovan Wilson, who plays mostly strong safety, but when they rotate into cover 2, they'll do that, or quarters, or any kind of 2-high structure. He's going to be the other deep safety. Not a particularly fast athlete, but a really instinctive safety on the back end. But because of that lack of athleticism, you'll see faster tight ends pull away from him, slot receivers. He's not the most consistent coverage player, but he's heady and very solid. And again, very good against the run coming downfield. So he's just a really good, balanced safety. And then J-Run Curse is their dime linebacker. He plays a ton of snaps for this defense and plays them really well. They've found a perfect scheme fit for him here. Played 922 snaps for this team last year. So to do the math there, Curse played like 71% of their snaps. Hooker played like 79%. Wilson played like 84, 85%. So these guys are all starters. Their kind of 3 safety dime defense is arguably their base front. And Curse is like the ideal, almost like, I don't really want to use Cam Chancellor's name because that's disrespectful to Cam Chancellor and what he was, but you do have Dan Quinn here, and he understands kind of what that sort of dime linebacker can do for the versatility and flexibility of your defense. And, Curse is a super consistent tackler. He'll take on blocks. He'll play the run, and he can legitimately be out there as a number 2 linebacker for this team. And then he's a good coverage player in the sense of linebacker assignments. But, in terms of safety roles, like covering slot wide receivers or showing a lot of range on the back end, that's not really realistic for him. But for what they ask him to do, he's really good in that role. So, he's got, I don't want to double count his impact, if you know what I'm saying. Like, his 81 coverage grade as a linebacker helped out the linebacker coverage. I give him a 75 grade in the secondary because I don't want to double count how he's used in this defense. So if that 75 sounds low, just look back to that linebacker impact there. But there's not a weak link in this secondary, and you love that. Now, as far as the safety depth is concerned, I love their depth for Jaron Kearse in that role. You got Israel Mukuamu, who's played some corner, he's played some safety. He likewise is like 6'4". He's learned to tackle better and has come along a little bit. I still don't know just how rangy he is as a safety. I think he could maybe play the Donovan Wilson role okay. I don't know if I love him as a single high free safety, though, if something happens to Malik Hooker. But he's interesting. Then you got Marquise Bell, who's a big, fast, loves to tackle prospect. Hasn't shown much on the field in terms of coverage, but we'll see if he makes the team or if they try to stash him on the practice squad. Wanye Thomas as well, kind of a linebacker type coming out of Georgia. So they really have some depth and options in terms of those big-bodied safeties. But in terms of like rangy actual safeties, Tyler Coyle was a really good athlete coming out of college. Sheldrick Redwine, likewise. I would imagine they try to keep one of those guys because I will say if there's a weak link in the secondary, if something happened to especially Malik Hooker, but Donovan Wilson as well, that kind of coverage ability on the back end might fall off a little bit because I just don't like Jaron Kearse playing really a whole lot of free safety at all, whether that's two shell or single high. So something to keep an eye on there if they suffer an injury, but you're pretty hopeful that won't happen, I think. So, again, 7th in the NFL for DB coverage, which rounds out a very special defense. They really, to no surprise, ranked 2nd in overall defense. They ranked 2nd in defense the last 2 years and are running it back with a really good unit again this year. Not a really good, a really special unit. You pair the 3rd best pass rush, the 7th best secondary in terms of coverage with some of the best coaching in the league. And it's really not a surprise that they rank so high, especially, they're my number 1 ranked pass defense. That's where they're really scary. And they're not going to blow a lot of leads in Dallas. If they can get ahead early, and force you into 3rd down and force you into passing situations, that's their happy place. They love to tee off. They've got playmakers on the back end. They force a ton of turnovers. It's such a fun defense to watch when they're ahead. Now, they're hoping they can be a better, consistent down-to-down defense from any sort of game script, if you will. They have struggled with teams like the Niners, who are really good at running the football. And right now they rank 15th in run defense, which they're hoping will be better than it's been in years past with Mazzie Smith, and maybe Damone Clark gets better there. But there is a world where that's still a little bit soft, and some of those teams that control the game a little bit more can get to this defense a little bit. But that's really their weak link, and they're hoping that it isn't brought out as much as it was last season and can ultimately help them get over teams like the Niners and the Eagles in this conference that are really freaking good run games. But, this is just such a balanced team, man. I've got them 13th offense, 2nd in defense. I will say the special teams has questions with the kicker spot there, just unproven there. If you don't feel good about your field goal kicker, you're never going to feel good about your special teams. So it's going to be wait and see there with the new guy. But as you look at their strengths and weaknesses, the weaknesses and questions are pretty tough to come up with. Offensive coaching, that I think is kind of the make or break key swing factor for this team. Mike McCarthy and Schottenheimer, they got to prove that they're at least solid in terms of coaching, and they can't allow this to be the 17th best offense in the NFL. This better be closer to top 10 than it is to 20. It doesn't necessarily have to be an elite group, but God, that would be unfortunate if Mike McCarthy ruins this thing, and I don't think that's impossible, by the way. But then it's like, okay, O-line depth, you expect a Tyron Smith injury, and can they survive that? Do they go and pick someone up maybe in the next week so you can kind of erase that as a weakness? That feels possible that Tyron Smith goes down and Dak doesn't have the time he needs to throw. And then special teams, where in the grand scheme of things, you'd rather have a better kicker, but it really is just kicker. The rest of it, they got a good return group. They've been good in terms of the rest of their special teams. So who knows? Maybe they found a star kicker. It does happen. So, pretty minor weaknesses and questions, with the biggest one being offensive coaching, and that gives you a really high floor, right? If you don't have a lot of weaknesses, you're going to ride a pretty nice line down the middle above a lot of teams. But what Cowboys fans and what Jerry Jones wants to know is, can this team have enough strengths to be a Super Bowl team, take that next leap? And you look at, the addition of Brandon Cooks really balancing out this offense and making the passing game more diverse. You have that incredible defense with the pass rush and the secondary and the defensive coaching, and hopefully the improvements they made in run defense so that that's not a weakness, right? It doesn't have to be a strength, but you don't want it to be a weakness as it's been in years past. And you say, okay, we can really get through some of these teams in the NFC and get to the big dance and be that elite team around Dak Prescott that, let's face it, he kind of needs if you're going to win a Super Bowl with that level of quarterback. But I do think that they can answer enough questions and really be one of the 2 or 3 best teams in football this year when all is said and done. So let's take a look at their schedule, their kind of over-under, their Super Bowl odds, their division odds, and I would say the over-under and the division odds are a touch low. I think you look at the over-under at 9.5 wins, and their schedule, which is certainly not easy. You have to play your own division, which is really hard, and the AFC East. So it makes sense why the over-under is a little bit lower there, but I do like that you get Seattle at home, you get at Carolina, you get Detroit at home. Those are your kind of non-division scheduled games, if you will. And I think they're just going to be really competitive and split against a bunch of really difficult teams because they are such a good team. And then they get to play the NFC West too, which they should be able to go 2-2 or 3-1 against. I think this is at least a 10-win team. If I were setting the over-under for this team, I would set it at 10. And it might get to 10 because betting the over on this does not pay particularly well, which means a lot of people are on the over. But I still think it's good money. I'd be really surprised if this team doesn't win 10 or 11 games unless you have just the injury bug. But then the division odds at basically 2-1. If they played this division 100 times, I think they win it more than 33 times, if that makes sense. I think it should be more 60-40 with the Eagles. I think the Cowboys only got better across the board, and the Eagles shook a lot more things up. The Eagles, obviously, I rank higher than the Cowboys, but I think there's a world where the Eagles' roster changes hurt them more than they hope, and Jalen Hurts had such an outlier season that maybe he regresses, and the Cowboys can actually end up a game better than the Eagles and win this division. So I think there is value at that plus 175 mark. Definitely if you can parlay over-unders, I like the Cowboys over 9.5 as one of the safer ones, which I guess makes me a little bit higher on the Cowboys this year, which is fun. But that's going to do it. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Cowboys fans, good luck to you. I know it's your own type of heartbreak every year, and hopefully that doesn't happen again this year. But ultimately, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your comments down below. Am I too high on this Cowboys team? Just right? Maybe you think I'm too low, but I don't see that happening. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for watching. Please do hit that like button. It really helps me out. Consider subscribing, and we'll see you for the next deep dive. Peace out.